Good. So welcome back. So my name's Jnanavaca, for those who don't know me. Very nice to see you all. And as Matthew was saying in the first half, we're going to be exploring, or I'm going to be exploring, continuing to explore, some symbols from Tantric Buddhism. The material that we're covering, Matthew and I, is in this book, but I don't know if it's still in print. Is it in print? Creative Symbols of the Tantric Path by Sangharakshita. So a wonderful book. I really, really recommend it. And today I want to explore a particular symbol. I've called my talk Entering the Cremation Ground. Entering the Cremation Ground. And in the Cremation Ground is a place of darkness and fear. And in the Cremation Ground, if we're fortunate, we may encounter the figure that's on the shrine, and she's, well, come and have a look at her at some point. This is an image of a Buddha figure, an enlightened being, in a wrathful female form. She's made of light, she's red, naked, she's dancing in the sky, she's a sky dancer. She wears garlands of skulls, and she drinks blood from a skull cup, so, a severed skull. She's sort of drinking, actually it's sort of the nectar of immortality, but it's also blood. And so we may encounter her in the Cremation Ground. But when I was thinking about what to say, I was thinking back to my younger days when I was about 30, maybe 31, and I had an encounter with fear that may not sound very frightening to you. It was very, very frightening to me. And I'm just going to tell you a story. So I used to work in the corporate world in IT for Marks and Spencer's, and it was the day that I was going to resign. I'd worked there for 10 years, and I decided over the previous couple of years that I had to leave. I had to leave because my values were changing, had changed. I was practicing the Dharma, and I couldn't stand being in this corporate world where, there were good people there, but one predominant kind of note in that world was of lying, of deceitfulness and hypocrisy. Another note was superficiality. I can remember meeting one of the directors of the business, and he was a very intelligent man, very, very sharp on it. And he said the best thing that happened to him that week was seeing how many strawberries we'd sold in the world, like millions, probably millions of pounds. And I thought, oh my God, I don't want to be like you. I don't want the best thing in my week to be like that. I also saw people who were frightened. When I was new to the company, I went to, I was one of the sort of graduate intake, and we went to a drinks party with the then chairman of Marks and Spencer's, and he was, I won't tell you his name, he was a bit of a bit of a bully, I think. So I was there with other graduates, other people my age, and the board of directors and the chair. And what I really noticed, well, two things. One was the board of directors, all these directors, these men in suits, they were all men in suits, they were terrified, frightened of him. They were behaving like they were children in front of him. And then when he left the room, they all sort of acted like they were grown-ups. And I thought, oh, no, I can't. This is a place of fear and superficiality. And the chairman at the time, he spoke to me, and he said, so what do you do? So I said, I work in IT. And he just sort of snorted as if that was, something contemptible. And he said, what did you study at university? And I said, I studied physics. And he looked at me and said, what use was that? And I thought, oh, thank you. And I have a sort of stubborn streak, and I said to him, actually, I think that the pursuit of knowledge is a really valuable thing. Anyway, that didn't go down well. Anyway, 10 years later, I'm still there, and I want to leave. Now, M&S provided me with security, money, and a sort of identity. And leaving was frightening. Leaving was very, very frightening. In those days, and I'm talking 25 years ago, people still had jobs for life. And in that world, in the world that I was in, people did stay there all their lives. They married, they found partners, everything was around the company. Also, I had a boss. I had several bosses, I had several lines. One of them, I had to go and tell that I was resigning. I won't tell you his name, we'll call him John. John was I don't know if he, I don't know if he's still working or not. Anyway, he was a bully. And he was a bully that enjoyed frightening people. He would sort of relish intimidating you. So he'd call meetings and then pick on somebody and just tear them to shreds in public. Or he would ask you to meet him in his office at 8 a.m. or whatever it was, and then not turn up. I mean, at all. And, whoever turned up would be frightened. Now, I'd only started working for John, and I hadn't yet had an unpleasant... He'd been polite to me, and we'd not clashed. I knew his reputation. And anyway, so I asked to meet with him, big glass office, and I walk in, and I'm really scared to say I'm leaving. I was working in a sort of system strategy area. And anyway, he says, sit down. So I sat down, and he says, what is it? And I said, I've come to tell you I'm resigning. And I was really, really scared. And he went purple with rage. I don't know if people still encounter this in the work environment. It was a weird environment. He went purple, and he immediately had jumped to the conclusion that I was going to go to a competitor and sell all the company system secrets to, I don't know, Sainsbury's or something. And I just looked at him. He was like he became demonic, literally in front of my eyes. And then I looked up at I'd sort of been in his office, but not very much. And I looked to my right, and there was a shelf, bookshelf, and bookcase. And on the shelf, there was a Buddha figure. And he wasn't a Buddhist. Anyway, there was a Buddha figure. And it wasn't just any Buddha figure. It was the Buddha figure was Amoghasiddhi. And he makes the gesture like this with his right hand of fearlessness. He gives confidence. It's the gesture of fearlessness. And I immediately relaxed. This man was apoplectic, and I just thought, it's fine. And he said, so where are you going? And if I had said Sainsbury's, which one was tempted to say in those circumstances, he would have escorted me off the premises. He would have had me, leave there and then. And what I said to him is, look, I'm a Buddhist, and I'm going to go and work for the London Buddhist Centre as a fundraiser. And he completely transformed. He sort of completely seemed to become human again. He looked at me and said, you're doing something really valuable with your life, more valuable than anyone here. And I really wish you well. And if you ever need my help, come and find me. So that's quite something, isn't it? Anyway, that was just a little story that came to mind. Because when you talk about the cremation ground in Tantric Buddhism, it's a literal place, but it's also a symbolic place. It's a symbolic situation where you walk into fear. It's a place of fear. You walk in there knowing that it's a place of fear, but you have to walk in because you want to grow, because your values tell you that you have to grow. I haven't had very many scary situations in my life, and in a way that was a tiny one. That was a tiny, tiny one compared to what most people have to face in their lives. But it was emblematic because I was walking into that situation because I wanted to grow, and it was scary to leave a well-paid job. I took about a 90%, 95% pay cut to come and work here, which was a lot. It was scary to do that, and I felt compelled to do it. There was, if I'd had a choice, in a sense, I would have backed off, and there was no choice because I'd encountered a higher truth, and I had to honour that. Otherwise, I would have been lying to myself, and I couldn't live with the lie. I couldn't live with that sort of betrayal of myself. In India, there are literal cremation grounds. Who's seen a cremation ground? Yeah, several of you. In Varanasi, probably, you've seen the ghats, the burning ghats. Well, in India, you have cremation grounds in every village. There will be, they have to, burn the bodies somewhere. And there's normally a ground, sometimes near some running water, banks of a river. And in this book, Sangharakshita Bhante, as we call him, he lived for 20 years in India, and he saw people dying and dead, and even performed some funerals. And he talks about how in India, death is seen very much as part of life. It's not hidden away. And the burning of the body is not seen as something just morbid. There's even a certain joy, an atmosphere of something probably a bit like something like awe, but within that there's a sense of joy. The body is taken uncovered, or it might have cloth on, but its face, the body's face, would normally be uncovered, the person's face, and it would be borne on the shoulders of men carrying it through the town, through the village, to this place where there would be lots of other bodies in various states of decomposition and decay. There would be a fire built, and then the cremation would happen, and then everybody would gather round, and presumably they'd pray or chant or sing, or just reflect on the person that's died. They might rejoice in the qualities of the person that's died. And it's not quite like that here, is it? It's not like that normally when people die. When my mother died, I was on retreat. I was on a solitary retreat. I can remember the thought of my mother dying first entering my head when I was a kid. Like, you as a child, at some point you realise that your parents are going to die. And I can remember that occasion when I realised that she would one day die. And then of course you forget about her. On my ordination retreat, so I was about 33, and it was a 4-month course. Actually, I'd just been ordained, and then I went on the 4-month retreat. There were a few days where I vividly had a sense of her dying. I mean, like she died. And it was, I don't know, it was just painful, shocking. I wanted to contact her, to make sure she was all right, but there's no contact allowed. And I sort of knew that if something had happened, somebody would contact me. But it was a very strong experience. Anyway, she didn't die, fortunately. But about 8 years ago, she did die, and I was on a solitary retreat it was just a few weeks. I was on this retreat for 3 weeks. Anyway, halfway through, I had this message. Some of the team came to tell me that she'd died. And she died quite suddenly. And I can remember... I can remember sort of talking to my sister on the phone, and then I was driven to the airport after I'd packed, very kindly by two friends who took me to the airport, Alicante Airport. And I can remember sitting in the airport, 10, 11 o'clock at night, waiting for my flight, feeling numb to it, feeling completely numb. Then getting back here, in the early hours of the morning. And what I'd most feared had happened. It happened. It had happened sort of when I least expected it. It's not like I feared it would be. Who here has been bereaved? Yeah, so quite about half of us in this room. And I don't know if you'll all agree, those of you who have been bereaved, it's not just grief. It was an odd feeling of a mixture of grief, and all I can say is that it was also joy. It was mixed with joy. Partly, there was a rational sense of that because she died well. She was old, elderly, frail, in pain, and she died so swiftly and well, and she was ready to go. And But there was more than that. It was an irrational sense that she was now free. Even that's not just irrational. She was free. And there was a sense of elation. I could feel her presence, and I could feel her joy. And what's more, I could feel her love. So it's like the cremation ground had just come to me. I hadn't stepped into this one, unlike when I'd resigned from my job. This one I hadn't asked for. This situation had come to me. I come from a Hindu family, and one of the traditions is that there's sort of Hindu prayers after somebody has died, before the funeral, but after the death. And so 2 days after she'd died, there was going to be, in fact the day after I arrived, there was going to be a big prayer meeting with lots of people from the Hindu community coming. The thing is, she wasn't a Hindu. I think she was a Buddhist. She meditated. She was more closely, she was a follower of Osho, but she was a Buddhist. And I decided I couldn't let there be Hindu prayers for her. That would be hypocritical. So I decided to lead those prayers and turn them into a Buddhist celebration. And that was stepping into the cremation ground. I didn't anticipate having to lead a gathering of 300-400 people the 2 days after my mother had died, and it was the most wonderful thing to do. I felt so fortunate to be able to do it because I was able to rejoice in her, and my sister rejoiced in her, and we did the Metta Bhavana for her. So I taught the Metta Bhavana, or briefly, taught the Metta Bhavana, and there were several hundred people there, and I was so happy that those people were sending her love, that we were all sending her love. So they're just two instances that came to mind where I have had to step up into a situation that I wasn't looking forward to. And in a sense, they're very ordinary situations. They're very, very ordinary situations. I mean, resigning for a job, I now look back and think, what was the big deal? My mother dying, it's a bigger deal. On the other hand, when I say it's ordinary, it happens. Yeah, it'll happen to probably all of us unless we predecease our parents. It'll happen. So it's ordinary in that sense. And yet it felt like a challenge. And had it not been for my Dharma practice, I wouldn't have stepped up. I really wouldn't have done. I don't know what I would have done. I wouldn't have left. I think I could have still been some sort of senior manager, probably, in a suit, in Marks and Spencer's. I don't know, sort of completely unfulfilled, and not having the courage to leave. I think had it not been for the Dharma, my life could have been very, very different. So the cremation ground is that crucial situation which can be frightening, well, you know is going to be frightening, but you walk into in order to grow, in order to grow. And you do meet demons sometimes in that cremation ground. But you also walk in with the power of the Dharma behind you. You walk in with faith, with Shraddha. So I want to talk a little bit more about fear. So fear is something that we probably all experience. The unenlightened mind, all of us, and I'm not enlightened, the unenlightened mind naturally wants to defend and protect ourselves. And even if you think of yourself as a courageous person, some people are more courageous than others. I'm not particularly courageous. I suspect that instinct to protect oneself is still there. It's still there. It's only an enlightened being, a Buddha or a Darkini like Vajrayogini, that experiences complete freedom from fear. Complete freedom from fear. I don't really know what that's like. I might have had glimpses of it. I don't know what that's like. For us, we need courage. We need courage. The Buddha to be, when he wasn't yet enlightened, experienced fear. And there's a sutta in the canon which talks about him experiencing fear when he went into the forest on his own. And he said that it wasn't just a forest, it was the Indian jungle with tigers and, snakes and things. And he said that when he was alone in the jungle meditating or lying down, sometimes fear would just come completely over him, consume him. It would fill his body. And that he trained himself to recognize, oh yes, this is fear, and not stop whatever he was doing. If he was meditating, he wouldn't move. You can imagine him, sitting there in the dark, meditating, and you hear the breaking of branches or twigs, and you just want to move. You want to open your eyes and run, and he wouldn't. He would continue sitting or lying or doing whatever he was doing, walking, whatever happened. And letting and feeling the fear through his body, feeling it course through his body. So I was reminded of this. This was a useful reminder when I don't experience a lot of fear, but I 2 years ago was on a long solitary retreat. It was a 6-month solitary retreat. It was in the mountains in southern Spain. So I was on my own for longer than I'd ever been on my own for. And you're in a mountain valley. It's a beautiful valley, but it is. You are on your own, and it gets very dark, and there were these kind of cliffs behind me and in front of me, and pine trees and forests and so forth. And I remember walking out one night. I didn't sort of go walking in the night. Anyway, I wanted to pee. So I came out of, I was in a house, in a sort of little stone house. And I came out with my head torch on to have a pee. and I sort of glanced up as I was peeing. And I kid you not, there were about 50 pairs of eyes. 50 pairs of eyes, yellow eyes, looking right at me in the darkness. maybe about 20. Anyway, it doesn't make any difference, does it? That doesn't make it any less frightening. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was a bit awkward. I wasn't wearing any clothes, and also you're peeing, and it's not very dignified. Anyway, I sort of realised that they weren't demons, they weren't vampires, they weren't going to eat me. They were a herd of ibex, which are like mountain goats. They're beautiful creatures, actually. They look more like deer than goats. They have wonderful horns. The adults are quite majestic. The kids are very sweet. And during the day, I'd seen them during the day sometimes. What I hadn't realised is that they were watching me at night as I was peeing. And the glare of my torch had lit their eyes. And there were just these kind of luminous eyes staring at me. And yes, I sort of momentarily, I kind of remembered the Buddha. Well, I brought him to mind every day, of course. So he came to mind as, okay, well, I've just got to pee, haven't I? And don't panic, don't be alarmed. So the thing I want to say is that some people, I'm not one of these people, by the way, some people enjoy challenging themselves, walking into challenging, sportsmen. I was thinking of Alex Honnold, the guy who, did you see Free Solo? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he climbs El Capitan in Yosemite National Park without ropes or any equipment. Literally, it's about 3,000 feet high, something like that. Or is it 30? I don't know. Anyway, it's high. And it's an extraordinary film. It was terrifying watching him do it. And what do I want to say? Well, I was impressed by him. I was really impressed by his single-mindedness, his discipline. It's heroic. I am not single-minded, and yet I should be in a way, because I know the Dharma is the highest values that I can conceive of, and unfortunately I'm still not able to practice with that single-minded focus that he could bring to climbing a cliff in Yosemite, without guide roads. And I'm not single-minded. I'm not disciplined like that. He had given up pretty much everything in his life to live on a camper van, to train every day of his life. That was the only thing that he kind of did. And I couldn't help but admire that. Quite apart from that, he would keep coming out with words of wisdom. So at one point in his in the documentary, he talks about how he's never wanted to be happy and cozy. He said nobody ever achieved greatness through being happy and cozy. And I thought, oh goodness, you're talking to me. Because I really do just want to be happy and cozy. So much of the time. And most of the time I am as well, happy and cozy. And I thought, oh dear, you're talking to me, Alex. Anyway, the point I want to make is that, yes, I think you can be impressive through challenging yourself, and many people do, and probably many of you in this room are impressive in that way, challenging yourself and growing through challenge. And I think that that's fantastic. But the Cremation Ground for me in this context is a bit different. It's not just challenging yourself for any old reason. I mean, I don't know why Alex Honnold challenges himself, but it's because you want to develop your mind. It's because you want to grow towards enlightenment. It's because you want to be a bigger person. That's why you challenge yourself. That's why you walk into the Cremation Ground in a tantric context. Does that make sense? Yeah. Tantric Buddhism isn't just saying risk your life for the sake of it. It's not saying that. It's saying no. There are situations in life where you can either do the easy thing and step back and stay small, or you can walk into the challenge knowing that it might be difficult and grow. The cremation ground is a situation, Bhante says, where you are forced to grow, because if you don't grow, you'll die. So it's a do or die kind of scenario. Maybe not literally, but that's how it feels. So yes, confronting fear, when that confrontation leads to growth, that's something that we really need to be prepared to do. And we start small. I think we start with what we can manage. So I wouldn't recommend going on a 6-month solitary, but I would recommend, if you've never done a solitary before, actually if some of you, I would recommend a 6-month solitary, but if you've never done a solitary before, I'd recommend trying a week or two. Try it. You might find that it's not as scary. Well, my experience is it's not as scary as you think it might be, and you'll definitely grow. Yeah. If you're not ready for a solitary retreat because you've never done a retreat before, go on a retreat, because again, it's not as scary as you think it might be. But it is important, if you do feel scared, to acknowledge that that's how you feel. Yeah. Sometimes we make all sorts of excuses, don't we? Retreats are not for me, solitary retreats. No, I spend a lot of time on my own. I don't need to do that. Actually, that's just covering over fear. Fear is not the only emotion in a cremation ground. It's also a lonely place. It's a place where meditators go to be with the charred, burning bodies. They're confronting death. And nobody else goes there. Meditators might. Tantric siddhas, tantric meditators might. But most human beings are not going to go there, not in the dark, not at night, on their own. It's a lonely place. And I think there's something significant here. I think if we're so frightened of being lonely that we won't risk being alone, then I think we won't grow in a particular way. What do I mean? I mean that there's a difference between loneliness and the sort of existential fact of aloneness. And the existential aloneness is a real growthful experience. But to experience it, you have to risk being lonely. So again, on this 6-month solitary, one of the most productive things about those 6 months for me was that I had a deeper sense that in some ways I'm alone. I will die alone. I was born alone. I am responsible for my life alone. I'm responsible for my own actions. I think I had a deeper sense of that just living by myself for 6 months. But I had to risk loneliness. And yes, there were times when I was lonely, but to be honest, they didn't last very long. Particularly if you do practices like the Metta Bhavana or the Sevenfold Puja, you feel very connected with people. You feel very, very, I felt extremely, I felt a lot of love, and I felt a lot of love towards me as well. I felt very connected. But the aloneness is really important. And I think in London, sometimes we have a lot of loneliness, but we don't have a lot of aloneness. Does that make sense? A lot of people in London are lonely, but they're lonely surrounded by lots of other people and surrounded by lots of distractions, YouTube and iPlayer and the like, which sort of keeps some of the loneliness at bay, keeps us from actually having to go into the loneliness, but also means that we never fully experience this existential situation where we're mortal. Nobody will, I know hopefully we won't die alone literally, but in a way you do die alone literally, yeah? And facing up to that the reason it's growthful is because contemplation of death, for example, helps us appreciate life. That's why we're doing it. That's why a Tibetan yogi, a Tibetan meditator goes into the cremation ground to sit with bones. Because contemplating death, staring it in the face, recognizing our aloneness and our mortality, helps us appreciate the life that we've got. Whereas feeling scared and hiding behind the computer in our happy and cozy kind of life keeps us on the surface of life. I think in this country, probably the most, well, I don't know about the most, anyway, one huge kind of issue that we face, at least from a dharmic perspective, is superficiality. Yeah, it's not that we're living in a war zone. It's not that most of us are not facing. I know life can be hard, but not most of us aren't facing sort of hunger and starvation and extreme deprivation. But we do live on the surface of life, and it's trivial, isn't it? And I catch myself being trivial. I had a it was just embarrassing, really. I was in Nottingham this weekend, leading a retreat on Saturday, a day retreat on Saturday, a day retreat on Sunday. Saturday evening, I was free. I mean, I hung out with a friend, and then we had an early night or something. He had an early night. I went to my room, and I didn't want to go to bed. I had a book. I found myself watching YouTube videos on my phone. And what was I watching? Oh dear. It was the best X Factor auditions. Which is, anyway, at one point my friend came in and said, you know, you all right or something? And he said, oh yeah. And I said, I'm fine. And he said, what are you watching? And I had to admit that it was X Factor. And he just said, oh, for heaven's sake, I'd just been teaching about Buddhist wisdom. Do you know what I mean? Enlightenment. Anyway, so I can be terribly superficial, left to my own devices. I hope I'm not alone in this room. Well, in a way, I hope I am, but I suspect I'm not. Yeah. So superficiality is such a prevalent kind of disease, and it's partly born of being sort of cozy and happy in that way. So at the moment we're commemorating, I should say, the Holocaust, aren't we? We're marking. There's an International Holocaust Memorial Day, and we're marking that. And 75 years isn't that long ago. I mean, it feels like a long time ago because it's before probably anybody in this room was born. But actually, from a human perspective, it was not very long ago. And of course, there are people still alive who survived the Holocaust, who lived through the Holocaust. And, well, in a way, I think what we can do as practitioners is at least from time to time, because I can't necessarily say that I live like this, but at least from time to time, contemplate mortality and human suffering and death, not from a perspective of trying to get morose and depressed, but from a perspective of appreciating what we've got, because so many people have died in agony and pain, and a lot of people still are suffering in the world in hellish places, not hopefully as hellish as some of the concentration camps, but nevertheless there are hell realms. And there's something distasteful about me forgetting that. Does that make sense? I think it is important that we remind ourselves of the human situation. if we can do that with a sense of gratitude and appreciation for what we have, then it's positive. Yeah. If it just leads to bitterness, hatred, depression, then it's not positive. Then don't contemplate death. You need, in order to contemplate death and horrors, the cremation ground, you have to have metta in your heart. You have to have metta for yourself and for other people. But when you've got that, metta isn't then just about making yourself comfortable. It is about seeing if you can really look at life. And looking at life means looking at death. It just has to mean looking at death. I was, because I was thinking of the Holocaust, and I'm reading a book at the moment by Vasily, a Russian writer who's no longer alive, called Vasily Grossman, called Life and Fate. Have you heard of Life and Fate? Yeah. It's set in 1942 in the war, in and around Stalingrad. Some of it's around Stalingrad, the Battle of Stalingrad, but some of it's set in Germany in a concentration camp. Part of the reason I didn't want to pick up that book and I was watching The X Factor was because I can't bear to read it at times. It's too demanding. I'd been reading about a fictional character. Well, there's a group of fictional characters. I mean, there's some historical characters in the book, but most of them are fictional. There's a bunch of them who are on a cattle truck train, heading for the gas chambers. They don't know that they're heading for the gas chambers, but you as the reader know that that's where they're going. And Vasily Grossman just picks out a few people and gives you a little portrait of their life, a vignette of their life. And one character is a boy called David. And it seems like he's on his own. He doesn't know anybody on the carriage, in the truck, in the... losing my words anyway, in the train. And what you get is a little bit of a flashback that he's remembering. And he's remembering staying with his grandmother, because his mother was working during the holidays. He stayed with his grandmother. And there's a memory of him, his grandmother taking him shopping, and she's bought a chicken this is I don't know if it's Poland or wherever it is. No, I don't know where it is actually. Anyway, she's holding the chicken. It's live chicken. It's not Sainsbury's that she's gone to. It's a live chicken, and she's holding the chicken by the legs, by the feet, and he's, walking along beside her, thinking, how can she be so cruel to be holding this chicken? And then they go to a butcher or something. Anyway, there's a man who kills the chicken. He breaks the neck, tears the head off the chicken, and, the chicken's just running around headless. And it shocks this boy, David, that somebody can do that. He's shocked and frightened by this image of a chicken being killed. And of course you know that he's on his way to hell. He's on his way in this truck to the gas chambers. It's such a moving, harrowing portrait that he paints. Vasily Grossman doesn't overdo it, but he leaves you with these images of people that are very real, very striking, in hell. So yes, I didn't even want to read it. Do you see what I mean? So I distract myself. In the most trivial ways. It's not that it's bad. It's not that it's evil or unskillful to distract yourself. It's fair enough. I just mean that let's not live our lives like that. Let's not live our lives on the surface. Let's, particularly if you've found the Dharma, which all of you have, something's drawn you here. So if you found some meaning in the Dharma, if meditation is working for you, if Buddhism is speaking to you, then it, in a way, you've already challenged yourself, or there's already a challenge, a gauntlet's been thrown down. I don't just mean the 6-week meditation challenge, I mean a lifelong challenge. A gauntlet has been thrown down of, are we going to try and transform ourselves according to the highest values that we can imagine? Are we going to try and become wiser, kinder, more aware, more generous? Are we going to try and realize this transcendent vision of true freedom that's free from death, free from all fear, free from all limitations of the mind? Are we going to do that or not? And the one thing that I'd say, for me anyway, that is the most challenging thing, is that I know that Buddhism works. Now, if you're new to Buddhism, you may still take refuge in doubt. You may think, oh, I don't know, it might work, it might not. It might be for me, it might not. If you keep practicing, believe me, it'll work. And then the real challenge starts. What are you going to do? I haven't talked about another cremation ground that I entered into, partly because Subhadra Mati is going to talk about it in a couple of weeks or so. It was my ordination. Asking for ordination was a scary thing. Training for ordination was mostly good fun. But then being invited to be ordained was terrifying. I mean, I wanted it, and when the letter arrived saying, come, I'll ordain you, Subhuti wrote to me and said, I'll ordain you. Come to India, I'll ordain you. It was like, no. And I can remember my private ordination. The ordination has two parts to it. The private ceremony was in the dark, and in the night I had to step out of this strange alien shrine room, make my way over on my own to a hut. We'd been meditating for about 4 hours. There were 6 of us getting ordained that night, and I was the last because I was the youngest. And they said that they'd have little lamps lighting the way to the place where I needed to go, so there would be a path. The lamps had all gone out by the time I got out there. It was pitch dark. I had not a clue. I had a rough idea, but not very much, of which direction I should be going in. I tripped over something, and I was wearing this robe anyway, which wasn't that easy to walk in. I tripped over myself, fell flat on my face, eventually found my way, already quite shaken up, to this hut. I opened the door, and there's my preceptor, Subhuti, looking like he was the Buddha, sitting by the shrine that was all lit up, and he just gestured to me to come and sit down. And I'm not going to tell you what happened in that ceremony. All I can say is that it was terrifying. I was very, very, very scared and elated at the same time. I was really nervous, scared, more than nervous, and completely joyous. That's when he told me my name. He said my name was Jnanavaca. I don't even remember fully registering it. I was so scared. That was a cremation ground, and it was the best thing that I've ever done with my life. I'm not saying you have to get ordained. All I am saying is that if you've responded to you might want to get ordained. I do recommend it, actually. But if you've responded to the Dharma, it's a challenge. What are you going to do with your life? Please don't spend it doing some job that you really don't want to do, in some environment where the values don't meet your own, where people are being hypocritical, bullying, superficial, lying, whatever they are. Please don't spend it just watching X Factor. Please look at death before you die, before you have to face death or the loss of somebody close to you, contemplate death, learn to do that in a skillful, healthy way so that we can live more fully, so that we can live more meaningfully. Viktor Frankl, let me just read you something that Viktor Frankl. So Viktor Frankl's lived through the Holocaust. He became a he was an Auschwitz survivor. He lived to be a psychiatrist and a neurologist. I'm going to read you several things. He says, each man, and I guess he means man or woman, each man is questioned by life, and he can only answer to life by answering for his own life. To life, he can only respond by being responsible. He says everything can be taken away from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So this is a survivor of Auschwitz saying choose one's own way. We have so much choice in a way that so few human beings have had. And it's such a shame if we just fritter it, that choice, on some sort of either trivial pursuit or a life that's dedicated to just being happy and cozy. And lastly, let me read you this, and then I'll start wrapping up. He says, what is to give light must endure burning. What is to give light must endure burning. Isn't that wonderful? You have to step into the cremation ground. You have to endure burning if you're going to be a beacon of light, if you're going to give light. And the world needs light more than anything. The Darkini here, she's a figure of light. She's also terrifying. But if you can approach her, if you can face her, if you can welcome her into your life, she turns into, well, she enters into you in ecstasy. She's a figure of bliss and ecstasy and unparalleled freedom. And she's a figure for who we can become. Our true nature is something that is so beautiful, so wonderful, that it's almost unimaginable. And it's such a waste of our lives if we don't try and move towards it. So I'm going to finish there, and then I'd like us to settle into our meditation postures. And I'm going to lead us in a mantra.